Good evening, East Alabama and West Georgia. Dr. Dodd with you on your Sunday. It is 7:51 p.m. Central, Sunday, August 4th, 2024. And we are here to talk about some weather for, mostly South Alabama, Southeast Alabama, South Georgia, the Georgia coast, and the state of Florida. As we begin to see what's going on with Tropical Storm Debby, most likely about to become Hurricane Debby. We only need about 5 miles per hour in greater strength, and we're going to be there. We're going to make it up to hurricane status. Big question, do we stay at Cat 1 or do we make it to Cat 2 before landfall after midnight tonight, sometime into the wee hours of Monday morning? And I think there's a decent chance we make it to Category 2. It's going to be marginal. A strong 1, a small Category 2, or not a small, that's a bad term, a minimal Category 2, I think, will be the possibilities. And there's no question there will be some wind damage right along the coast, maybe all the way up into the Tallahassee area. But that's not going to be Debby's legacy. Debby's legacy is going to be flooding rains. I'm talking about rains of biblical proportions are possible across some portions of South Georgia, the Southeast Georgia coast, the coast of South Carolina. And you guys know I don't use terms like that loosely. When I say catastrophic and biblical, you might better pay attention to it because that is the verbiage coming from the National Hurricane Center. If you've been watching the Weather Channel or any of the weather information throughout the day, you know that's the verbiage they are using here because we are looking at an unprecedented, potentially an unprecedented weather event across South Georgia, Southeast Georgia, and South Carolina. Weather records show the most rain that ever occurred in Savannah, Georgia in a short period of time was around 15 inches of rain. That was several years ago. It was during Hurricane Matthew. And there was tremendous flooding in the Savannah area. We are potentially looking at 2, maybe even 2.5 to 3 feet of rain here in the Savannah area if this storm stalls out, which is what the long-range models are telling us it's going to do. This could be, we could be embarking on something that we've never seen happen before. You'll remember Houston, Texas, several years ago, where a tropical storm stalled right on top of Houston, and there were just days and days of flooding. You remember those visuals you saw on television of water rescues all over the city of Houston. And this could be potentially what we're looking at from Jacksonville up the Georgia southeast coast. We're talking about places like Brunswick, Darien, Jekyll Island, Tybee Island, Savannah proper, Hilton Head, even up into Charleston and Myrtle Beach. We could be looking at massive amounts of flooding in those areas. So we are really glued to the radar now to see if Debby is, number one, going to make it to hurricane status, and we believe that she will. And 2, does she take the track that the National Hurricane Center has put out? I feel pretty confident in that track, but understand, you folks in Southwest Georgia, we're talking about Donaldsonville, we're talking about Albany, we're talking about Cordele, we may be even talking about Columbus. A shift to the left or to the west by 50 to 75 miles could make a world of difference in the type of weather you folks receive there in southwest and southern portions of west central Georgia. At the moment, if we take the track that's out there, I think that you guys will see rain in places like Cordele, Albany, down to Donaldsonville. And you may be looking at 4 to 6 inches of rain. But if the eye of this storm shifts a little bit to the left by, like I said, 50 or 75 miles, if it makes landfall around let me get my bearings straight here. We're looking at landfall right now somewhere in the Big Bend area of northeast Florida. And we're talking about maybe Apalachicola. But if we get a shift to the west by 50 to 100 miles, then we're getting over there close to, Panama City Beach, Tyndall Air Force Base, Port St. Joe. If we get landfall over there, then that brings southeast Alabama and southwest Georgia more into play with this storm. Right now we're thinking that landfall will be somewhere in the general vicinity just south of Tallahassee, maybe out there around Carabel Island. And then moving on up and over toward Moultrie, Georgia, maybe Nashville, Georgia, with the exact eye of the storm. But if we get this thing pushed over to the left just a little bit, then we're going to have problems in places like Albany, maybe Sylvester, back down toward McIntyre, Thomasonville, Bainbridge, Georgia could come into play. So you folks down there in southwest Georgia and southeast Alabama, at the moment, if it takes the track that's out there, you're going to be okay. You're going to have a lot of rain. There could be some power outages. But if we move this thing over just a little bit, that could drastically change the forecast for your area. So got to really pay attention to what happens with the radar tonight and the exact track that this storm takes as we go through the overnight hours. So let's do some graphics here. Let me talk you through some of the different graphics that we have out there this evening. And this is the official forecast track from the National Hurricane Center. At 8 p.m. this evening, you'll see that it's pretty much parallel with Tampa, Florida, off to the west of Tampa. And then we think at the moment it's taking that turn to it's moving to the north, and then eventually we think it's going to start turning to the northeast. Here's the latest official numbers from the National Hurricane Center and statement. Debby has strengthened as it continues to head toward the Florida Big Bend area. Will bring a major flood threat to the southeastern United States this week. That's because this storm is going to stall out over southeast Georgia, or maybe just off coast of southeast Georgia in the next day or two. As of 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 o'clock Central, it was located at 28.1 north, 84.1 west, if you're tracking the storm. About 100 miles west of Tampa, Florida, about 90 miles southwest of Cedar Key, Florida. Maximum sustained winds are at 70 miles per hour, so all we need is 5 miles per hour. We're going to hurricane status. Present movement is north at about 12 miles per hour. We expect that to continue for the next several hours. Then we expect to see a little bit of a nudge to the northeast. And once it makes landfall, we believe it's going to slow down and eventually stall out. Minimum central pressure at this hour, 29.30 inches of mercury. So we're looking at landfall somewhere around 2 a.m. tomorrow morning. So we're looking at, about 5 or 6 hours from now. We could be looking at landfall there in the Big Bend area. And then by 2 p.m. Monday afternoon, it's going to be about to cross over the Georgia state line somewhere just north of Tallahassee as a hurricane. So from the from the Georgia-Florida state line just north of Tallahassee all the way back out into the Gulf, we're going to be dealing with hurricane-strength winds. So certainly there could be some wind damage. Trees will fall. There will definitely be power outages in those areas. And then the storm is expected to be up into south central Georgia, maybe at a point around Douglas, Georgia, by about 2 a.m. Tuesday morning as a tropical storm. And then we move it on over into southeast Georgia by 2 p.m. Tuesday afternoon. We may be looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of Pooler, Georgia by that time. And then it's just going to stall out right there over Savannah, Tybee Island, out there just south of Hilton Head. And by 2 p.m. Thursday, we're going to be looking at maybe Charleston. By 2 p.m. Friday, it's not going to move much. Maybe Raleigh, North Carolina, or just right on the North Carolina, South Carolina state line. by 2 o'clock Friday afternoon. So you can see we're going to deal with this for the entire week. And you'll notice this big, broad hatched area out there past 2 a.m. Tuesday morning. So what does this mean? That means that after about 2 a.m. Tuesday morning, at the moment, we don't know exactly where this storm is going to go. There are all kinds of possibilities out there on the table. And why is that? Why is the confidence so low past about 2 a.m. Tuesday morning? Well, it's because we have multiple weather systems that are going to steer this storm. We have high pressure building in over Mississippi, West Alabama. We have high pressure out in the Atlantic, and so it's blocking Debby from moving as it normally would. Normally, once it hits land, it turns off to the northeast and races up the eastern coast, and we're done with it in about 12 hours. Not the case this week. With those two blocking high pressure systems, the storm really is kind of wedged in there. It can't really go anywhere. So there are all kind of solutions out there, one of them being it goes back out into the Atlantic. It hangs out there for a day or two just offshore at Tybee Island, and then it turns around and comes back into Savannah, and maybe works back up into central Georgia. Another possibility is that once it hits that high pressure out in the Atlantic, it kind of shoots it or catapults it back up to the north and maybe brings it up maybe to Atlanta. Could definitely bring it up to Atlanta and then across northeast Georgia. Other possibilities are it just continues to very slowly migrate right up the coast, the Atlantic coast over the next several days. So all kinds of possibilities out there. After about 2 a.m. Tuesday morning or 2 a.m. Tuesday morning, we don't know exactly where it's going to go, and we don't know exactly which areas are going to be affected the most, but we're going to have to really pay attention to this one. You hear me say this all the time. This is going to be one of those storms where we're just going to have to raise the window and look outside and see what's happening. But if you're anywhere in central southern Georgia, obviously North Florida, even southeast Alabama, the Carolinas, you really need to be paying attention to this as we go through the next few days. Again, the legacy of this storm, wherever it ends up going, and at the moment it looks like the southeast Georgia coast, you are looking at unbelievable amounts of rain. So what happens when we get that kind of rain? I'm going to show you some graphics in just a few moments of how much we expect. Well, the southeast Georgia coast is low country. We're talking marshland for the most part, but folks live there. You get east of I-95, there's not as many folks as there are on the west side of I-95. But there are a lot of folks who live down there in the low country, places like Brunswick, Darien, St. Mary's. Of course, that's out on an island, but you get the idea. When the water comes up like that, there's all kind of creatures that live out in those swamps, and they start looking for high country. They're trying to get away from the flooding just like you may be, and so you end up with reptiles and animals in places that they normally don't stay. So if you're going to ride this out and you're going to stay down in that area, be extremely careful. If you have to go outside, you want to make sure you do it in the daytime where you can see where you're stepping, because there's no telling what you may stumble upon if we do start to see flooding in that area. All right, so that's the graphic of the track of this storm. Let me look at a couple of other things. These are key messages from the National Hurricane Center. Potentially historic heavy rainfall across the southeast Georgia and South Carolina coast through Friday morning, with likely result in areas of catastrophic flooding. Heavy rainfall will likely result in considerable flooding impacts from the Florida Big Bend region through southeast Georgia and the coastal plains of the Carolinas through Friday. There is a danger of life-threatening storm surge along portions of the Gulf Coast of Florida as well, with 6 to 10 feet of inundation above ground level expected somewhere between the Okaloosa River and the Swanee River on Monday. Residents in the storm surge warning area should follow any advice given by local officials. So that's another great point. If you're down there in that Big Bend area, anywhere near the Swanee River, If you're in an area that is flood prone, even if you've never seen water up to your front door, but if it's ever been close to your front door, you got to get out, folks. This is not one you want to ride. You know, I'm awfully afraid there are going to be people down in that area that say, oh, this is only going to be a Category 1, maybe a low-end Category 2, not a big deal, because they're paying attention to the wind speeds. Debby is not going to be known for the damage from the wind. Debby is going to be known for the loss of life and injuries and damage from catastrophic flooding, because Debby's not going to move that much. Now, right there along the Florida Big Bend area, you're not looking so much at aerial rain flooding, but storm surge is going to be a major problem right there. The storm's still going to be moving pretty quickly when it comes on shore. So from the coastline up to about Tallahassee, we're not really that concerned about flooding, even though you're in that 6 to 8 inch range. But when it gets up into southeast Georgia, it's just going to put on the brakes and sit there for a couple of days. That's where the catastrophic flooding could take place across southeast Georgia and up toward the southern South Carolina coast. So let's take a look at a couple of other things here. Looking at the tornado threat, so far we have seen a few tornado warnings there on the west side of the Florida Peninsula as the storm just kind of runs parallel to the Florida west coast. But this doesn't appear to be a major tornado producer. You know, we're going to have to see what happens when it makes landfall later tonight, early tomorrow morning. But at the moment, if there are going to be tornado warnings, they're most likely going to be in those areas where you see the yellow. That would be from about central Florida up to south central Georgia, of course, on either coastline in North Florida, and then the Georgia coastline and up the South Carolina coastline. That's where we could see some of the strongest feeder bands, and as the storm makes landfall and starts to make that right-hand turn, you get that veering in the upper levels of the atmosphere, and that's what spawns those tornadoes. So we're talking most likely, if there are going to be tornado events here, we're talking about places like let me just call out a few names here: Fitzgerald, Georgia; Nashville, Georgia; Valdosta; Waycross; maybe Douglas, Georgia; Hazelhurst; Hinesville; Brunswick; Kingland Island, back up toward Darien; Savannah, of course; Statesboro; Swainsboro; Vidalia. Most likely south of Augusta. Not sure this gets up to the Augusta area, maybe down around Waynesboro. All those locations stand a decent chance of seeing tornadoes from this storm after daybreak tomorrow and throughout the day tomorrow, maybe into tomorrow night as well. All right, so now let's take a look at the rainfall potential. I just want you to take a look at that. And let that soak in just a bit. We're right there along the South Carolina, Georgia state line. We're talking Savannah, Tybee Island, Hilton Head, all the way up to Charleston. We're looking at 16 to 20 inches of rain possible. If that happens, it doesn't take very much for Charleston to go underwater. Not going to take very much for Savannah to go underwater. Of course, Tybee Island's out there on an island. You've got Hilton Head. All of those areas are going to experience catastrophic damage if we get that 16 to 20 inches of rain in a 24 to 48 hour period. We've never seen anything like that before in those areas. Again, Hurricane Matthew was the closest thing we got to it in past history, and that was 15 inches, and there was mass flooding down there. So you can only imagine what 20 inches will do. Now, if you're back a little bit further to the west, we're still talking 12 to 16 inches, and then outside of that, we're looking at 8 to 12 inches. You folks back over there toward Albany, 4 to 6 inches, I think, is plausible, and you may be on the low end of that. So you may be in the 4 to 5 inch range category, and then on back toward the Alabama state line, you're in the 2 to 4 inch range category for rains. Again, this is all assuming that this storm takes the exact track that the National Hurricane Center is forecasting. They've gotten very good at the tracks over the years, but when we start talking about just a few miles making a huge difference, the science isn't there. The margin of error on landfall here is pretty broad. Even though we think it'll be somewhere in the Big Bend area. If it jots to the left 50 to 75 miles, you can take all that red you see over on the Georgia coastline and back it back to the left by 50 to 100 miles, which could make all the difference in the world at your house. And I'm just telling you folks in southwest Georgia to really be on top of the latest weather forecast, as things could change, and they could change very rapidly. Because we're within that 6 to 8 hour window now to where landfall will start to take place. There's all the watches and warnings that are in place. Basically, we have hurricane warnings up now for the Florida Big Bend area, and that stretches up into west Florida, northeast Florida, Tallahassee. We have a handful of counties in extreme southern Georgia also under hurricane warnings. The brownish area you see, that is a tropical storm watch. And then when you get on north of that, the pink color is a flash flood warning, and then the green is going to be a flood watch. That stuff over in Mississippi is a heat advisory. I'm noticing a lot of questions over in the chat room about Pensacola, Panama City, Gulf Shores, Fort Walton Beach. At the moment, if we take the track that the Hurricane Center has out there, the weather should be pretty nice in the northwest Georgia communities, northwest Florida communities that so many of us visit for vacay. So basically from Apalachicola west, and that includes Panama City, Fort Walton, Destin, Seagrove Beach. That includes Pensacola, Orange Beach, Gulf Shores, Fort Morgan, Mobile, Biloxi, and back toward New Orleans. You're going to be fine. Now, there are going to be riptide currents. So it's not going to be very safe to go out in the water. But typically on the west side of any hurricane, the weather's gorgeous. The problem is right around the eye of the hurricane and on the east side, that's where the dirty part of the storm is, and that should stay well away from the Panama City and Pensacola Beach area. Look at that, would you? That's just ugly. That's the latest satellite shot of Debby just within the last 30 minutes, and you can see that Debby is exploding and is rapidly intensifying as it continues to move to the north. One of the things we've been watching to see is if that center of circulation was going to possibly go through a recycle and relocate. That could happen and displace it to the left, but it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. It just looks like we've got crazy intensification taking place there, basically just a little bit to the northwest of Tampa, Florida, and it's going to stay out in the Gulf waters as it continues to the north and then make landfall after midnight tonight before daybreak tomorrow. And it just really does look like it's going to be right there in the Big Bend area of the state of Florida, probably just south of Tallahassee out there on the beach is where we're looking at landfall taking place. But if you'll look real close up there around Biloxi, Mississippi, you'll see some storms kind of in a line from New Orleans all the way back up to around Biloxi and just west of Mobile. That is a cold front. That cold front is acting as a steering mechanism for this storm as well. You got the cold front there, and then you have high pressure out in the Atlantic. You have high pressure building over Mississippi, and so that's why this storm is kind of stuck. It just has nowhere to go. See a question about Miami. Miami is going to be perfectly fine. Maybe some scattered showers, but this thing is way north of Miami. It's going to drag some showers and storms through there, but nothing on the magnitude of what we're going to see up in Tallahassee, and then on up into portions of Georgia as we move forward with this event. So there you go. That's kind of the latest information we have, and there's a look at the latest radar shot of Debby, and clearly you can see the eye of the storm as it swirls there just offshore from Tampa, Florida. We have flood warnings ongoing now in the Tampa area. I'm going to see if I can, let's go back to the graphics, and let's see if we can get, yeah, there we go. There's Tampa, Florida at this hour. And you can see we've got rain out there, but it's not anything significant. Maybe some of the heavier storms are between Sarasota and Tampa or out on the eastern side of Tampa. This live camera shot obviously is over on the bay side, so it's not in the area where the heavier rains are taking place at the moment. And let's go back up and see if we can get Carabel Island. Stand by just a bit. No, I think Carabel Island does not want to work for us. Try one more time. Huh. I will work on that, and we'll see if we can get that. Get that to work for us by the time we do our next update. But again, there's a live shot from Tampa, and we will have some live video from Savannah and Tybee moving forward as well. Yeah, we don't need any mayhem right now. We have enough mayhem as it is. Good stuff. All right, so let's go back to the radar, and then let me look over here in the chat room and see if anybody has, I got a fruit fly in here, see if anybody has any questions. East Alabama, West Georgia, if we stay on this current track, you're fine. Not really looking at much of anything across East Alabama or West Georgia. Up here in the North Georgia mountains, we look fine right now. Question, Dr. Nahn, I'm in Jekyll Island this week. What do you think is going to happen over here? I think, Susan, you need to make plans to get out of there tomorrow. I don't know how to put it any more bluntly than that. If this course continues the way it is right now, if it does make landfall where we think it's going to, and then it starts to take that right-hand turn, I think anybody on Jekyll Island would be absolutely foolish to stay there. I don't know, a lot of folks watching us, if you know much about Jekyll Island, but just on high tide, the north end of the island goes underwater, up there where the horse stables are. I was there about 3.5 years ago, watched it happen with my own eyes. The whole north end of the island up there where the campground and the horse stables are, out there where the pier is located, on the north end of the island, completely underwater. Couldn't drive through it. That's just with a high tide. So when we start looking at massive amounts of water, we're talking 15 to 20 inches of rain out there on Jekyll Island, and that storm sits right on top of you for 2 or 3 days. You're going to lose power. You're not going to be able to go anywhere. You may not even be able to get off the island. So I don't think you need to take that chance, Susan. If the forecast holds through tomorrow morning, if I'm you in your situation, I leave Jekyll Island. Had that question earlier today. GBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigations, is having a big class down there, supposed to have a big class down there this week with their criminal justice system. And so a lot of people are asking questions about Jekyll Island. And I've already given that advice once today. Jekyll Island's not somewhere I would want to be during this storm. Not because we're talking hurricane-type weather, because when you think hurricane, you think wind. But because of the rain that's going to be coming with this storm across Jekyll Island, Tybee Island, all of the islands off the southeast Georgia coast, a no-go with this storm system. I think Ocala's going to be fine. The storm's still going to be moving relatively quickly when it moves through Ocala. I mean, it's raining down there right now, but then it pulls on up to the north of Ocala before it makes that turn to the right. The major issues with this storm not going to happen until it stalls out, and that's going to happen back over towards southeast Georgia. So I believe Ocala's going to be just fine. Brody is staring at the screen. Hey, Brody. Glad you're watching us tonight. I think Brody's down in southeast Georgia, southwest Georgia, down around the United States Marines Logistics Base in Albany, Georgia. I think we have an increased audience down there. And that's good. River and Brody. And my daughter says you're going to think mayhem if you don't shout out River and Brody. River and Brody. Hey, River and Brody. Sorry, you know when I look, Sam, you grew up with me. You know when I start preaching, I can't stop. So I'm going back and catching up on some of the comments. Pensacola, Florida will be fine. Miami will be fine. No floating the Flint River. No, probably not. Hey, Miss Mary and Frog Eye. No, Sam. Stay out of the water. Don't go in any water anywhere. Y'all know I preach about being situationally aware when it comes to weather. I mean, every chance I get, that's my thing. Because so many people get injured and they lose their life unnecessarily if they just simply had any idea what was going on around them. My daughter is probably one of the worst ones. Called her the other day to tell her about a severe thunderstorm in Albany. Guess what she was doing? She was about to pull into the parking lot at Walmart with my grandchild. And she said, I thought that cloud looked pretty bad, Daddy. Hey, Mike Hill in Panama City. I think y'all are going to be fine over there as long as we stay on the same track that we have right now. I think Panama City will be just fine. Matter of fact, you ought to have pretty good weather. Yeah, Sharon, that is nasty. I mean, that is a classic hurricane signature on radar. Well, I'll tell you what's going on, Sam. That's a big hurricane right there, or about to be a hurricane. That big hole right there in the middle, that's the eye. And then all this yellow and red on the outside, that's very heavy rain, which is indicative of severe weather. And then the yellow pieces you see scattered out all across the state of Florida, that's heavy rain as well. The green in this type of setup is heavy rain. The yellows and reds are extremely heavy rain. Again, for East Alabama, West Georgia, I don't really think this is going to be a big deal unless we get that shift to the west. But, as every moment passes and we don't start seeing that shift take place, then the chances of it actually happening down the road are slim. I feel pretty good about the Big Bend area of Florida. Then the next question is going to be, when does it start that turn to the northeast? You folks down there in Albany need to pay attention to that one thing right there. Once this makes landfall, if it doesn't almost immediately start turning to the right, then every moment that it doesn't, you become more and more in danger there in the Albany area. I mean, if it were to just continue going straight or north, it would take it right up into the Albany, Georgia area. But again, even then, even if that were to happen, you'd be looking at much more wind than we think you're going to get. But unless it stalls out directly on top of Albany, and that would go against every model that's out there right now, you still wouldn't be looking at anything, real major. The problem is going to be over southeast Georgia where the brakes get put on, where it stops and sits there for a couple, 2 or 3 days. That's where the problem is going to be. And it could be significant. I can tell you that, of course, the state of Georgia has already... Pooler and Savannah would not be a place I'd want to be. I mean, that's going to be right there in that Pooler's just outside of Atlanta. I'm sorry, Atlanta. Pooler's just outside of Savannah up there on I-16. And those areas will flood. If we get that 15, 20 inches of rain that's possible in that area, then there will be flooding like we've never seen before. Again, Hurricane Matthew was the closest storm we could find in the record books that brought as much rain as we possibly could get with this one. And we're talking about that. What we got going on here? Oh, that was a piece of foam off my headphones, making sure I didn't have a bug on me. Matthew brought right at 15 inches of rain to the Pooler, Savannah area. But 20 inches, we don't know what that looks like. I mean, we can run the models and tell you what it looks like, and I can tell you it's not pretty. So Pooler, Savannah really needs to be paying attention to this, especially the closer you get to the coast. But even out there as far away as Pooler, there could certainly be some problems with flooding. You're welcome, Jennifer. And you're not even what you're getting is from that cold front that's trying to stall out across the area. What you're looking at is not even directly associated with the hurricane so far. It'll change tomorrow. It'll be a wet day. LaGrange, you should be fine. This should stay well south of LaGrange. So the areas in Georgia that I think will, if we stay on the same track we're on right now, the locations in Georgia that I think, and I'll just call out some names of some locations where I think you really are in the bullseye area. And I really think probably I-75 and east. I think I-75 and east, and then probably south of Cordele. So you understand, you folks in Albany, you're close. You folks in Moultrie, you're close. Tifton, you're close. Adele, you're close. Valdosta, Thomasville, you're all close. But I think the flooding rains will be along and east of I-75 and south of Cordele. We're talking about locations such as Fitzgerald, Nashville, Georgia, Waycross, Douglas, Hazelhurst, Baxley, Vidalia, Hinesville, Jessup. And then over on the coast, of course, you've got Kingsland Island, Brunswick, Darien. Then you've got Jekyll Island, Tybee Island, Savannah. And then on up into South Carolina, Hilton Head, Charleston. Maybe as far north as Myrtle Beach. I mean, even Wilmington could have some problems from this in about 48 hours. And needless to say, Jacksonville, I mean, we're going to be seeing some flooding rains in Jacksonville as well. Probably in Florida, north of Gainesville, Lake City, back over toward Perry. And then, of course, landfall will be south, we believe, of Tallahassee. Out there around Alligator Point. Maybe in the Big Bend Wildlife Management Area, Flint Rock Wildlife Management Area, St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge. Coming right up through the middle of Appalachia Bay. Dog Island, if you know where that's at. St. George Island, St. Vincent's Island. You know, and if I'm in Port St. Joe, Mexico Beach, or even back up toward Panama City, I'm going to sleep with one eye open tonight. I'm probably going to get up about every 2 or 3 hours, though, seriously, and check the weather, just to make sure something drastic doesn't change during the night because, you know, we're talking about landfall just south of Newport, Florida, which is south of Tallahassee. And as the way the crow flies across the state over to Panama City is not that far. So I'm going to keep a close watch on things throughout the night. And if we do start to get a turn to the west, then you folks need to have a plan. If you're just joining us, Dr. Don with you on your Sunday evening, 8:34 Central. We are doing some live coverage, just kind of letting you know what we think may happen here with Tropical Storm Debby, which will become Hurricane Debby probably by the 11 o'clock update this evening. We believe that we will go into, we believe that we will be at a hurricane status. So here's the Big Bend area of Florida. There's St. Mark's. That's just south of Tallahassee. Let me zoom back out so you can kind of get an idea of what we're talking about. There's Tallahassee. And we're thinking that landfall. Stand by. Let me get the teleprompter going here. We have a little art time. So landfall should be somewhere right in here. Now you'll notice from Panama City over to that area is not that far. Well, let's just see just how far it is. We can do that. About that. Panama City to where we think the hurricane will make landfall is 85 miles. So if we get a shift to the west at 50 to 75 miles, you can now begin to understand that that is going to make a huge difference. as we move forward. That's why we've got to pay attention to what's going on throughout the night tonight. Let me go over to the tropical. Let's get Debbie going here. All right. So, this particular model is putting landfall closer to Perry, Florida. Out there around Spring Creek. Which is south and southwest of Perry, Georgia. Maybe around the Spring Warrior Fish Camp is where the latest guidance is putting Debby to make landfall. So that's a little bit further off to the right. Now, understand that I don't believe that's the official National Hurricane Track. I believe it's a little back to the left. But let's just assume this is correct. Then that's going to bring it up to near Valdosta, near Waycross, near Jessup, and then back out into the open waters. Just offshore from Tybee Island. And it would stall. It would stall probably somewhere around Jessup and Waycross, or once it gets back out into the open waters. But again, understand that's just one possibility. You'll see we got a pretty good line of thunderstorms running up I-16 right now. Coming up on Statesboro and Vidalia. That's the outer leading edge of what will soon be Hurricane Debby. And then up here in Alabama, I mean, even in East Alabama, there are a few scattered thunderstorms that appear to be running way out ahead of the tropical storm. These are quick tropical storms. They move through, they dump heavy rain for just a couple of minutes, and then they're gone. I mean, that's all we're looking at here. Nothing tornadic, nothing with any significant wind in it. These are just tropical, quick tropical showers. And we could see some of that migrate even up into the Atlanta area and even up here in northeast Georgia in time. Okay, there's the official National Hurricane Cone. And so the official track is going to be right in the middle of that cone. So that would put landfall back where we were originally talking about it, which would be out there on the Flint Rock Wildlife Management Area, just south of St. Mark's, just south of Highway 98. But literally, folks, anywhere. Anywhere in this area could see landfall from this hurricane. No, not on this track. There will be no issues in Canton, Georgia from Hurricane Debby. For Canton to come in play, we would have to see a little bit of a shift to the left, and it would have to run right up the Alabama-Georgia state line a long way, which we saw Hurricane Alberto, or Tropical Storm Alberto, do back in 93, 94. And that's one storm that's been referenced here. If you will remember, that one set right across East Alabama and West Georgia for days and didn't move. It kind of got trapped, just like we think is going to happen with Debby. And that was one storm that was referenced earlier today. The National Weather Service did a briefing for emergency managers across the state of Georgia. We did a county call, and the state meteorologist talked about Tropical Storm Alberto and referenced that storm and what could happen with this storm. He also, and some of the verbiage that's being used with this is just pretty incredible. He also advised that this could be a 500 to 1,000 year flood. You know, we hear about the 100-year flood all the time. Doesn't mean it only happens once in 100 years. But it does mean that it's rare. Well, a 500 to 1,000 year flood goes back to the day when that guy started rounding up animals in pairs of two. 1,000-year flood is pretty significant, and we potentially could be looking at that. If this stalls out across southeast Georgia, like the potential is there that it could. No to Tybee Island. No to Jekyll Island. You got to understand, I mean, all of these locations are either at or just barely above sea level to start with. And it's just not going to take much rain to cause a problem. You're out there on Cumberland Island. Not a good idea. Kings Bay base down there. St. Mary's. Jekyll Island. Piney Bluff. I'm just calling some locations out there in the marshland, the low country, which is east of I-95 in Georgia. Hickory Bluff. St. Simon's Island. Little St. Simon's, Sapelo, St. Catharines, Ossabaw Island, of course you got Tybee, Wilmington Island, White Marsh Island, all that out there between I-95 and the Atlantic is very, very low country. That's why it's called low country. It's going to flood if we get 15 to 20 inches of rain. That whole area will be underwater. And when you get up into South Carolina, we're talking Bloody Point, Harbor Town, of course, Hilton Head, Paris Island, Fort Fremont. And you got to understand, too, one of the problems that may arise here, and it's just a possibility, but as we get the storm close to the Atlantic and we start to get that offshore flow inland, if things line up just right, we could get storm surge on the Savannah River. And then all of that rain that's happening inland's not going to have anywhere to go. You know, if we bring Debby back out open water, maybe around Jekyll Island or Sapelo, and it just sits there, turning, well, it's backwards. It's turning that way. I got to remember, y'all see me backwards. But you'll see there on the radar. So when that gets over north of Jacksonville, you'll see up there at the top, it's twisting back to the left. Well, that's going to push water from the Atlantic back in the Savannah River. So if we have, 10, 15, 20 inches of rain happening out at Pooler and Savannah, it has nowhere to go because what's left of Debby is sitting out in the Atlantic, pushing water from the Atlantic back up the river in the wrong direction. So that's all. That's a piece to this, and that's why we're afraid that we could see flooding to a catastrophic level with this storm. Hey, Jonathan Jones. Jonathan's actually down there. Jonathan, by the way, is trying to fill my shoes, and he's doing a doggone good job at it, too. I pick at him all the time because he's a little fellow. I pick at him all the time. That's because I love him. That's why I pick at him. But Jonathan, when I left, for those of you who know me, I worked for GEMA at one time, and I would be down there right now. And my wife says, thank you, by the way, Jonathan. The producer, Tracy, says, thank you. I would be down there tonight because the entire Georgia Emergency Management Agency has been deployed into the Savannah area or the coastal area. Jonathan has been assigned to the Savannah area. So he's going down there or may already be down there. I'm not really sure. But Godspeed to you, my friend. You're about to learn a lot about recovering from disasters. I spent a long time down in southwest Georgia during Hurricane Michael and also spent a good bit of time at the SOC in Atlanta during all of that also. So this will be Jonathan's first big rodeo with GEMA as the area field coordinator. He's responsible for Northeast Georgia, but when something like this happens, they take all the area field coordinators from all over the state and put them in the area that we expect will be affected by the storm so that we can begin that recovery process as soon as possible. So, I'm an emergency manager now in a county up in Northeast Georgia, and certainly could end up going downrange to help those guys down there if they need it. We do have a bag packed, and we're ready to go if we're needed down that way. All we got to do is receive a phone call, and we'll be headed that way. But there are a lot of different things here that could cause this to be a situation that, and I hate to use cliches, but we could potentially be in uncharted water here across Savannah down to Brunswick in the state of Georgia with the rainfall totals that will be possible with this storm. Best case scenario, the high pressure out in the Atlantic moves a little further offshore or weakens, and Debby just scoots right up the East Coast and is gone in a few days. We have some trees down. We have some power outages. We have some low-lying flooding, some minor flooding, and this is all said and done with. That's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, it stalls out like they're forecasting it to do, and we end up with 15 to 20 inches of rain across southeast Georgia up into South Carolina. That's going to cause a lot of problems. There will be, we're not looking at a landfalling Category 1, 2, 3, or 4 hurricane coming in off the Atlantic into southeast Georgia, so folks are not evacuating. And that scares me to a degree, especially east of I-95, because the potential is there for a lot of folks to be stranded. And I just really, really hope we're not looking at another Houston situation or another Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans type situation. It's what I'm hoping we don't see. Of course, we don't have the numbers of people in southeast Georgia that we have in both of those other locations. But, we're talking 15 to 20 inches of rain. We have nothing to look at down in southeast Georgia to see what could really happen. We have to look at known areas that have flooded with that kind of rain, and that being New Orleans. Of course, that was from the levees bursting. But Houston's a prime example of what 15 to 20 inches of rain will do to you. And you'll remember, Houston was underwater. I mean, literally. There were water rescues going on everywhere. And I know that Georgia's getting prepared for that. We have GSAR teams that have already been staged in certain areas around the state to be ready to go in and perform those swift water rescues or water rescues in general if the need be. But my concern is folks are not evacuating because we're not looking at a hurricane warning across the eastern side of the Georgia coast. We probably will be looking, we're already under a tropical storm watch. We're probably going to be looking at a tropical storm warning, which doesn't require evacuation. But I'm really afraid that the rain is going to end up being the legacy of this storm, and we're going to look back on it. We're going to say, well, my goodness, we should have got those folks out of there. But that's a tough thing to do, to pull that trigger on an evacuation. That's tough. And when you do it, most people are not going to pay attention to you anyway, and you really can't do a mandatory evacuation. You can do it, but it's not enforceable. So the only thing you can do is throw the information out there, hope people pay attention to you and get out. And for those who don't, then that's what the recovery period is going to be for, to go in there and get them out. Understand, though, there's going to be a period of time, and it may be 2 days, where emergency responders are not going to be able to get to you in places across the Georgia coast area and back up toward I-95. They're not going to respond to you as long as the winds are 35, 40 miles per hour. They're not going to be able to get to you if you're underwater. Helicopters cannot fly to get you off your rooftop if you've got tropical storm weather taking place in the area. So if you have chosen to stay, make sure you have plenty of water, make sure you have plenty of food, be prepared to be without power for up to a week, and have a plan on how you're going to elevate yourself or get higher in the event the water gets up into your residence. You always see it on the Weather Channel after one of these storms. If I'd have had any idea. We're trying to tell you. Orlando will be fine. Lots of rain, gusty conditions, maybe even some power outages in Orlando. But the storm's moving north at a pretty good clip, 11, 12 miles per hour. It's not going to slow down and stall out, which is where the problems are going to come from, until it gets up there in southeast Georgia. So Orlando should be fine. Now, Orlando has a tornado threat throughout the night tonight. And, some periods of heavy rain, some gusty winds, and like I said, some power outages are possible. But the 15 to 20 inches of rain we're talking about, that possibly is going to take place across southeast Georgia if this storm stalls out. Hope that it doesn't. I hope this is a big bust. I hope the storm doesn't stall out. I hope it keeps on moving. If it does, we don't have a problem. But the computer models are telling us it's going to stall out, so we have to prepare for that. Yep, all we got to do is hit 74. What is it? It's 10 o'clock Eastern. They may do an intermediate advisory and go ahead and put it at category status before midnight. Pensacola should be fine if it takes the track that we have plotted for you. Yes, it's going to be probably 150, 160 miles east of Pensacola, and I'm just grabbing a number out of the air. I think landfall is going to be somewhere around 85 miles east of Panama City. And then Pensacola is a good ways back over on the Florida-Alabama state line. So, 150, 160 miles to the east of Pensacola. They should be just fine. You're welcome, Amber. Anytime. Wilmington Island, yeah, we'll keep an eye on that for you. That's a couple of days, maybe 3 days out, but by the end of the week, you know, late Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, Wilmington Island could be dealing with some issues up there as well. It just really depends. I mean, if this thing goes back out in the Atlantic and just sits there for a couple of days, it could re-strengthen. I mean, there's just all kinds of possibilities on the table here. Hey, Jennifer, no, I don't think East Alabama or West Georgia is going to deal with anything from this unless the track changes significantly. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Could Jacksonville flood like South Georgia? I don't think so, because of where it's going to stall. It's going to stall out up there across the Georgia coast, which is going to pull showers and thunderstorms in off of the Atlantic. Now, Jacksonville is going to be close, but I think Jacksonville will be on the southern end of where the catastrophic flooding could take place. And I also, well, here's one good thing, too. Jacksonville will be on the south side of the storm, so the flow will be onshore to offshore. You follow what I'm saying? It'll be pulling water away from Jacksonville out into the ocean. Savannah, however, is going to be on the north end of the storm, which means it's going to be pulling that Atlantic moisture right up into the Savannah River, piling that water up, and then you have the rain that's taking place inland that has nowhere to go. So I think Savannah's in much greater danger, given the track that we have right now. If the track changes, then yes, Jacksonville could come into play. But right now, with Jacksonville being on the south end of the storm, I don't think the danger is from flooding is nearly as great in Jacksonville as it is up there in Savannah. No, Kim. I mean, you could get a scattered shower every now and then. That stuff you got coming through East Alabama right now is kind of indirectly from the hurricane, or soon-to-be hurricane. But we're not looking at anything major across East Alabama or West Georgia. Nothing in Valley or LaGrange. Yeah. Yeah, see, Deborah's talking about Tropical Storm Alberto in 94 and the devastation in and around Dougherty County, which is Albany. It was just devastated, underwater for days. I remember that well, too. I had just moved to Roanoke. I had just started working for Eagle 102, and I remember that. It was in July. I believe it was right around the 4th of July in 1994. I remember it well. And that's kind of again, that was referenced today in the county call that I was on, of what can happen when a tropical storm stalls out over an area for a long period of time. They referenced Tropical Storm Alberto. And again, they talked about Hurricane Matthew, which is the most rain Savannah has ever received that was recorded in history. And that was 15 inches, and there was considerable flooding. We could be looking at 15, 20 plus inches in some locations around Savannah and along the Georgia coast. But the problem we've got in Savannah, depending on where the stall takes place, is with that counterclockwise motion, it's going to be pulling Atlantic water back up into the Savannah River. And then the storm sits there a couple of days and just continuously pours rain. All that water that runs off eventually goes into the Atlantic. It has to. But if you're damming up the Savannah with wind that's pushing the rain back or the water back into the river, and the river just kind of reverses, there's nowhere for the rainwater to go. So that's going to exaggerate a bad situation potentially. Thank you, Kim. It does get kind of tough sometimes, but gosh, I love it. I love every minute of it. I'm blessed to be able to love what I do. Thank you, Cindy. I don't mind telling you, there are times I'm so dadgum tired I can hardly hold my eyes open, and all I want to do is lay down and sleep for a week. When I finally get that opportunity, I may sleep 2 or 3 hours, and I'm right back up because I'm afraid I'm going to miss something. But I do. I love every bit of it. All right, folks, we're going to wrap this up because I do have a daytime job, which I've got to go to tomorrow. And so the idea here is that I will have your primetime forecast out by 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. We'll have the absolute latest. I think landfall will have just already happened by the time we record our morning weather forecast. So I should have some good information for you by about 6 a.m. tomorrow. But we may just actually... hey, Leslie, I'm an emergency manager in White County, Georgia. I'm the 911 Division Chief, Emergency Management Division Chief, and I actually control animal control, too. So I can take care of your dogs, cats, and tornadoes, and your help that you need on 911. Got them all covered. Actually, I may just do a live in the morning now that I just talked myself into it. Instead of recording, I think we will do a live in the morning. And I know it's going to be early, but I have to see, I'm an hour early. I'm an hour ahead of Alabama. So probably around 5 a.m. Central. That's early. I get it. We'll probably go live around 5 a.m. Central and go for about 30 minutes, which it'll be recorded. So when you get up in the morning, you can still watch it. So that's what the plan will be for tomorrow morning. Tell Sam to be mindful in the Albany-Leesburg area with the tropical storms, hurricanes coming in on the Gulf Coast. Through lots of flooding. Yeah, I've been talking to her all night, Miss Deborah, and that's what I've been telling her too. If it takes the track that we have right this moment, I think the Albany, Leesburg, Sylvester area right there in Dougherty County and Worth County will be okay. They're going to get, 4 to 6 inches of rain. It's going to be gusty. There certainly could be some power outages, but I don't think we're not looking at hurricane-type weather as far as wind, and the storm's not going to stall out in that area. It's going to go move back over toward Waycross before it starts to put on the brakes. And that's going to be the area of Georgia that really could get nailed by this thing over on the southeast coast. Now, that's all provided everything stays on track as is right this moment. Again, if it were to shift further to the west, then Albany could certainly be in play with some of that heavier weather. But I just got to tell you, I feel pretty good about the track on this thing. And I don't think Albany... Dougherty County, Worth County, that area back up toward Cordele, Lake Blackshear, I don't think that area really has anything to worry about as far as the biblical rains that could come with this, which right now we think is going to be back over on southeast side of Georgia. So we're going to wrap this up for tonight, and good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, I'll see you back in here first thing tomorrow morning. Like I said, around 6 a.m. Central, we'll do another live. I'll give you the absolute latest information on what I am quite sure will be Hurricane Debby by that time. We're only 1 mile per hour away from it right now. The latest information is she's up to 74 mile per hour as she continues to churn just off the Florida west coast, just northwest of Tampa, headed to the Big Bend area of the state of Florida. Say a prayer for all those folks down there. And good Lord willing, the creek don't rise. I'll see you back in here first thing tomorrow morning with your primetime forecast.